Hello and welcome to the latest IBAC podcast. IBAC is Victoria's anti-corruption agency, and our role is to expose and prevent public sector corruption and police misconduct. My name is Kerryn Adams and I'm the Strategic Advisor for Prevention and Communication at IBAC. Today I'll be chatting with Deputy Commissioner David Wolfe about IBAC's latest perceptions of corruption surveys. Welcome, David.
Thanks, Kerryn. Great to be with you.
For our listeners, the perceptions of corruption surveys are something that IBAC undertakes regularly. This year, the surveys sought the opinions of state and local government employees, Victoria Police employees, business suppliers to both state and local government, as well as the Victorian community. And the surveys seek to better understand their knowledge about corruption, perception of its prevalence, and attitudes towards reporting. These are not surveys with a small sample size. This year we had over 9,000 people participate in one of the surveys between April and May. Previous surveys with these same groups were conducted back in 2022. We used the results of these surveys to better target corruption prevention and education work. For us to effectively prevent corruption, it's important that people understand what corruption is and how they can report it. The surveys also explore the awareness and perceptions that people have about IBAC. This is really important for us to understand so that we are ensuring the right message is getting out about who we are and what our role is. So let's jump in to discuss some of the findings from this year's survey. David, one of the key themes from this year's survey was around perceptions of corruption being a problem. This year's results showed that there's widespread opinion that corruption occurs in Victoria and an increasing opinion that it's posing a problem in the workplace. So what do you think these findings indicate?
Thanks, Kerryn. Well, firstly, can I start by saying how important this survey is? And that's for two key reasons. So this data is largely provided by employees of public sector agencies, and it provides contemporary insight for leaders as to where the staff see corruption risks and those behaviours that indicate the risks. And secondly, the results really help inform our agency and the integrity system where we should focus our corruption prevention activity and indeed some of our investigative attention. Can I also qualify that the responses are around perceptions, so it's not actually what is observed. And those perceptions are informed by a range of factors like actions, events, conversations, so observations, and even reporting, which includes the media and our investigative reports. But that all said, we've seen a rise in the perception overall that public institutions are susceptible to corruptions. So most respondents, around 77%, see corruption as a problem across the sector, but that drops to 30% when referring to their own workplace. Now that percentage is up from 24% in the last survey, so more people think corruption's a risk in their workplace, which says there is a better understanding of the risks more broadly.
Absolutely. And I mentioned earlier, one of the other groups that we do survey is business suppliers to both state and local government. And I think one of the really standout statistics from this year's survey was that 41% of business suppliers to government have decided not to bid on a contract in the last 12 months due to concern about possible corruption. And this had increased from 34% back in 2022. So can you tell us a little bit about how would you interpret this finding and how would IBAC use this data?
This particular response is the standout for me in the survey. And now noting that the respondents to the survey is not all government suppliers, but of those who did respond, 41% said they did not bid because they did not think it was a fair process. And what this result highlights is that there's a clear area for public sector leaders to focus their attention on ways to make their organisation more corruption resistant. And the procurement area is one of those which we always know is an inherent risk when there's that transfer of public funds through to the private sector for goods or services. And it says to me that the transparency of that process, so the perception of fairness of that process is something that really ought to be a focus for the public sector.
Thank you. I think it's probably one of the most startling findings we've had come out of the survey. But another really important theme that has emerged is around the types of behaviours that are considered to be most likely to be a high risk in the workplace. So those making the top of the list, which were consistent across all of the surveys, were a breach of professional boundaries, so things like bullying and harassment, inaction, as well as favouritism and nepotism. And we also saw a perceived increase in the likelihood or risk associated with corruption misconduct when interacting with suppliers. So what do you think needs to be done here?
Well, firstly, bullying and harassment does not in itself constitute corrupt conduct. But what we know that in a workplace where these behaviours exist, the corruption-resistant culture is diminished. And we see many examples of this in our investigative work. And we know in these workplaces people are reluctant to report corrupt conduct and that the improper activities often go unchecked. And I think the important element of this part of the survey results is what I spoke about before. And this is where staff in public bodies are identifying behaviours that give rise to impropriety. And this is incredibly valuable for the managers and leaders to understand and address through their targeted prevention activity. And what the result also shows is that whether it's real or perceived risk, these findings should really be used to identify the gaps and drive change.
And I think that point around the role of managers is a really critical one, which we might pick up on again shortly. But another really important theme that we explore in the survey is around attitudes towards reporting corruption and misconduct. And an important finding that emerged from this year's surveys was that while intentions to report corruption and misconduct remain high, they have declined since 2022. While most of our respondents say they would report corruption or misconduct if they saw it, the level of awareness of how to make a report varies across sectors, and it was particularly low amongst community members. For employees, they are less likely to feel supported by direct managers to make a report, and the opinion that reports will be treated seriously is waning. The results also tell us that there's some uncertainty that exists around the likely outcomes from making a report of corruption or misconduct, including around the expected repercussions that people might experience, as well as the types of protections that are available for those who make a report. So as a Deputy Commissioner at IBAC, what do these findings about attitudes towards reporting say to you?
It says to me that this is one of the key areas where we can focus our attention so that reporting of corruption is an issue not just for us but for the public sector in its entirety. We know the two key reasons people are reluctant to report is their personal consequences, like what will happen to them if they do report, and that nothing will happen when they do report something that's improper. So agencies can really focus and work on the speak up culture, give confidence to staff to report and ensure the processes are in place so that any report will be dealt with properly, confidentially, and the appropriate action taken. And for IBAC, we can focus our prevention work on assisting agencies with their speak up culture and really turning the perception of reporting as a personal risk to an organisational and a sector positive.
Terrific. Yep, lots of opportunities there across the different sectors. And finally, the survey results also showed that IBAC is well known, with the majority of people indicating at least some level of awareness, and this has increased from 2022. Amongst community and business suppliers, we saw that over 90% agreed that it's important that IBAC exists. And while decreasing since 2022, media reporting continues to be the main way that employees are hearing about IBAC. So from a prevention and communication perspective, it's positive to see that IBAC is increasingly more known. And for the first time in 2024, we also asked some new questions about trust in IBAC and the types of functions that we perform. Overall, the survey revealed that there are high levels of trust in IBAC, particularly amongst Victorian and local government employees. And those levels of trust rise and vary depending on the tenure, age and rank of participants. So what's your interpretation of these findings, David?
Well, firstly, it's quite encouraging to see that those levels of awareness are growing across the broader sector. I think the different levels are really dependent on what activity IBAC is undertaking and in particular our engagement activity with the different sectors for which we have oversight. But I think the key element for me is around the trust piece, and trust is fundamental to IBAC. So like all public institutions, trust in the public bodies is critical. It enables the public to understand the work we do and allow us to do our work. So we work really hard on making sure that we are as transparent and fair as possible and ensure that we maintain that public trust.
Thanks for your time, David. I think that brings things to a conclusion. So if you're interested in exploring the results in full, we encourage you to visit ibac.vic.gov.au/perceptions 2024. Here you can also find an interactive dashboard that enables you to drill down into some of the results in more detail. So thank you for listening. To hear more IBAC podcasts, visit our website at ibac.vic.gov.au. Also, you can subscribe to IBAC Insights on the website to get the latest news and events, a heads up on new reports, expert commentary, early research findings, and information on conferences and events.